There is something about you right now, something about the way you're carrying yourself, the way you're moving through your life, the way you're existing in the aftermath of what happened between you and the avoidant person, that is creating psychological crisis in them that they cannot control, cannot manage through their usual strategies, cannot rationalize away, no matter how desperately they construct narratives designed to make them feel superior or unbothered or justified in their choices. And that something is deceptively simple. You're unbothered. You're okay. You're not falling apart. You're not desperately pursuing them. You're not sitting in devastation waiting for them to realize what they lost and come crawling back. You're not posting sad things online, or mutual friends aren't reporting back that you're destroyed, or the signs aren't there that your world has ended without them in it. You're just living, moving forward, existing without them at the center of your existence. And this quiet, steady, genuine unbotheredness is doing more psychological damage to the avoidant than anything you could have said or done or expressed in anger or hurt ever could have done, because it's hitting the one thing their entire defensive system wasn't built to handle. The possibility that they weren't as essential as they believed, that losing them didn't create the devastation they expected, that you were always capable of being whole without them, and that the power they believed they held through their withdrawal and their hot and cold behavior and their emotional unavailability was never actually power at all, but was simply the illusion of power that only existed because you were previously participating in the dynamic by caring desperately about whether they stayed or went. Your unbotheredness is driving them insane, not because it's manipulation, though they'll desperately try to frame it as manipulation, because framing it as manipulation is the only way they can make sense of it without confronting the more terrifying possibility that it's genuine. They need it to be an act because if it's genuine, if you're actually okay, then everything they believed about themselves and about the relationship and about the power dynamic between you is wrong. And being wrong about the fundamental architecture of their psychological world is more terrifying than almost anything else they can imagine. So they watch you. They pay attention to every signal they can find. They analyze your behavior, looking for cracks in the facade, looking for evidence that beneath the calm exterior you're suffering, looking for proof that you still care desperately enough that your unbotheredness is performance rather than reality. And they find nothing, because there's nothing to find, because you're genuinely okay. And that genuineness, that authentic peace with however things unfold, is the most destabilizing force the avoidant has ever encountered. More destabilizing than any confrontation, more destabilizing than any ultimatum, more destabilizing than any expression of anger or hurt, because it challenges the very foundation upon which their entire sense of power and control and significance was built. Why your unbotheredness specifically targets the avoidant's deepest psychological vulnerabilities. The avoidant person's defensive system was constructed to handle specific threats, pursuit, pressure, demands for intimacy, expressions of need. These threats are familiar, they're predictable, and the avoidant has developed sophisticated responses to each one. But your unbotheredness isn't any of these threats. It's something entirely different, something their system has no prepared response for, something that bypasses every defense they've built because it doesn't trigger any of the mechanisms those defenses were designed to manage. Understanding why unbotheredness specifically targets their vulnerabilities reveals why it creates the psychological crisis they're currently experiencing. Their deepest vulnerability is the fear that they don't actually matter, that beneath the significance they believe they hold in other people's lives, they're actually replaceable, actually dispensable, actually not as essential as they need to believe they are to maintain their sense of self-worth. This fear has been present their entire life, buried beneath layers of defense and independence and self-sufficiency, but it's there, operating quietly in the background of every relationship they've ever had. And your unbotheredness is speaking directly to this fear with devastating precision. When you're okay without them, when your life continues functioning beautifully without their presence at its center, when you're not devastated by their absence, their deepest fear is confirmed. They don't matter as much as they believed. They're not as essential as they assumed. The space they occupied in your life has been filled, not frantically or desperately, but quietly and naturally, by other sources of fulfillment, other connections, other reasons to wake up in the morning, feeling like life is worth living. This confirmation of their deepest fear is what creates the insanity they're experiencing, because the fear was supposed to remain theoretical, was supposed to never be tested against reality, and you've tested it simply by being okay. And the test result is devastating. Their second deepest vulnerability is the belief that their withdrawal creates power, that by pulling away, by withholding their emotional availability, by creating distance, they maintain control over the dynamic and maintain significance in the other person's life. This belief has been fundamental to how they operate in every relationship. Withdrawal creates anxiety in the other person. Withdrawal creates pursuit. Withdrawal creates the dynamic where the avoidant is the one being chased, being wanted, being needed, which feels safe because being needed means you matter. Being pursued means you're significant. Being chased means your presence is valued enough that your absence creates distress. Your unbotheredness destroys this belief completely. You're not anxious about their withdrawal. You're not pursuing them. You're not demonstrating through your behavior that their distance is creating the distress they expected it to create. The withdrawal that was supposed to be their power move has turned out to be meaningless. Not because you're suppressing your response to it, but because you genuinely don't have the response they expected. You responded to their withdrawal, not with pursuit, but with your own life continuing. And this response reveals that their withdrawal was never power at all, but was simply behavior that created space. Space they assumed you couldn't fill, but that you filled without drama or difficulty or any of the anxiety they were counting on creating. Their third vulnerability is the assumption that love, once given deeply, creates permanent leverage, that because you loved them, because you were invested, because you showed through your behavior that they mattered to you enormously, they would always hold that significance over you, regardless of what they did with your love or how carelessly they treated it. This assumption made them feel safe, even as they behaved badly. She loves me, so she'll always come back. So I can withdraw and go cold and create distance, and eventually she'll pursue me again because the love won't just disappear. Your unbotheredness reveals this assumption as catastrophically wrong. Love doesn't create permanent leverage. Love that's been repeatedly disrespected doesn't maintain the same desperate quality it once had. Investment that's been met with consistent withdrawal doesn't sustain itself indefinitely through willpower alone. At some point, the investment recalibrates, the emotional energy redirects, and the person who is desperately in love finds themselves genuinely at peace with however things unfold. This recalibration is what they're witnessing in you, and it's terrifying because it means the safety net they assumed your love provided has been removed, and they're now standing on ground that has nothing beneath it except the consequences of their own choices. The specific ways their insanity is manifesting as they watch you, being unbothered. The psychological crisis your unbotheredness creates in the avoidant isn't abstract internal suffering. It manifests in specific observable behaviors and thought patterns that reveal exactly how destabilized they are by your calm, peaceful, genuine okayness. Understanding how their insanity manifests reveals the depth of impact your unbotheredness is having. They're obsessively monitoring your social media, checking your posts, analyzing your photos, reading your captions, looking for evidence that you're performing happiness rather than experiencing it. They need to find proof that the unbotheredness is act, because act means they still hold power, still matter, still have the significance they need to believe they have. Every photo you post where you look genuinely happy creates specific anxiety in them, because genuine happiness means you've moved on, means they didn't destroy you, means the relationship ending wasn't the catastrophe they assumed it would be for you. They're searching desperately for the crack, the post that reveals suffering beneath the surface, the caption that hints at loneliness, the photo where the smile doesn't quite reach the eyes. And they're finding nothing because there's nothing to find. And the finding of nothing is creating more anxiety than finding evidence of suffering ever could, because nothing means you're actually okay. And actually okay means everything they believed about their significance was wrong. They're checking with mutual friends. Casually, they think subtly, asking questions that are designed to seem like innocent interest, but are actually intelligence-gathering missions to determine whether your unbotheredness is genuine or performed. How's she doing? Asked with tone designed to communicate casual concern, when actually the question is desperate need to know whether you're suffering. Is she seeing anyone? Asked with tone designed to communicate friendly curiosity, when actually the question is desperate need to know whether you've replaced them and whether replacement has been easy or difficult. The mutual friends either see through the questioning or they don't, but either way, the information that comes back, she seems really good actually, genuinely happy, creates specific distress because it confirms what they feared. You didn't need them the way they believed you did. They're creating scenarios designed to provoke emotional response from you, reaching out with ambiguous messages, appearing in places where they know you'll be, behaving in ways designed to test whether your unbotheredness cracks under pressure of their presence or their communication. These provocations are desperate attempts to restore familiar dynamic where their behavior creates predictable response in you. If they can make you angry, they matter enough to provoke anger. If they can make you sad, they matter enough to create sadness. If they can make you pursue, they matter enough to be pursued. But you respond to their provocations with the same calm equilibrium you've been maintaining, and each non-response confirms what they're terrified of. They don't have the effect on you they believed they had. The provocations aren't working. The scenarios aren't creating the emotional response they were designed to create. And this failure of their usual strategies to produce usual results is driving them progressively more insane. They're experiencing intrusive thoughts about you throughout their day, not romantic or nostalgic thoughts, but anxious, analytical thoughts, where they're constantly processing what your unbotheredness means, constantly trying to decode it, constantly running scenarios in their mind about what's really happening beneath your calm exterior. Is she actually okay, or is she hiding it? Did she move on this fast, or has she been processing for longer than I realized? Is there someone new? Does she think about me at all, or have I just completely disappeared from her life? These intrusive thoughts are consuming mental energy they cannot redirect, because the questions don't have answers they can access, and the uncertainty created by your genuine peace is more anxiety producing than any direct confrontation would have been. They know how to handle conflict. They know how to handle pursuit. They don't know how to handle someone being genuinely fine without them. The genuineness is the thing they can't process. They're experiencing specific form of jealousy that isn't about romantic replacement, but about replacement of significance. Jealousy about the friends you're spending time with, the activities you're engaging in, the life you're building that doesn't include them. This isn't jealousy about who you might be romantically involved with. It's jealousy about who and what is filling the space they thought only they could fill. Every friend you laugh with, every activity that engages you, every interest that excites you is evidence that the space they occupied wasn't actually irreplaceable. It was fillable. It was fillable by multiple sources. And the filling has happened naturally, without the desperate searching they assumed would be required. This specific jealousy about significance replacement is more painful to them than romantic jealousy would be, because it attacks something more fundamental, their belief that they were uniquely essential to your happiness. They're lying awake at night, replaying every interaction they had with you, searching for the moment where you shifted from desperately invested to genuinely okay, trying to identify the exact point where their behavior stopped mattering to you, where the pursuit stopped, where the investment recalibrated. They're looking for the turning point, because if they can identify it, they can understand what they did that caused it, which gives them illusion of control over a situation that actually escaped their control entirely. But there isn't single turning point to identify. There's gradual shift that occurred through accumulation of their behavior over time, through your own healing work, through your decision to prioritize yourself over a relationship that was depleting you. The absence of identifiable single moment makes the situation feel even more uncontrollable to them, because they can't pinpoint what to change or what to do differently. The shift already happened, and it happened through process they couldn't have prevented with any single different choice. Why your unbotheredness works more powerfully than any direct confrontation or expression of hurt ever could. The avoidance defensive system is specifically designed to handle direct confrontation. When you expressed hurt, when you communicated how their behavior affected you, when you tried to have honest conversations about what needed to change, their system activated its defenses and managed the threat through withdrawal or deflection or blame shifting or minimization. These are familiar responses to familiar threats, and the system handles them efficiently, even though handling them means the underlying issues never actually get addressed. But your unbotheredness isn't a threat their system knows how to handle. It bypasses every defense because it doesn't trigger any defense. Understanding why unbotheredness works, where confrontation couldn't reveals the psychological mechanism that makes it so devastatingly effective. Direct confrontation activates their fight or flight response, which triggers withdrawal as primary defense mechanism, which creates distance that temporarily resolves the threat from their perspective. When you confronted them about their behavior, when you told them how their withdrawal hurt you, when you expressed need for consistency, when you communicated that their patterns were unacceptable, their nervous system registered threat and activated withdrawal response. The withdrawal created distance. The distance reduced the immediate intensity of the confrontation. And from their perspective, the threat was managed, even though nothing actually changed. This is why direct confrontation rarely creates lasting change in avoidance. The confrontation triggers the exact defense mechanism that prevents them from actually receiving and processing what's being communicated. Your words reach their ears, but never reach the part of their consciousness where genuine change occurs, because the defense activated before the message could penetrate deeply enough to matter. Your unbotheredness doesn't trigger withdrawal because there's nothing to withdraw from. There's no threat to create distance from. There's no confrontation to defend against. There's no pressure to escape. You're simply existing peacefully, and they're simply observing that peaceful existence. And there's no mechanism in their system designed to manage this specific stimulus. The absence of threat means the absence of defense activation, which means they're left completely open and undefended in the face of information that's devastating to their self-concept. The information, you're okay without me, I'm not as essential as I believed, my withdrawal doesn't create the effect I assumed it created, arrives without any defense to soften its impact. It lands directly, completely, with full force, precisely because you're not doing anything that would trigger their defenses to activate and protect them from it. Direct confrontation also gives them something to push against, a position they can disagree with, an argument they can counter, a narrative they can construct in opposition. You're being too demanding. You're not understanding my need for space. You're making this about your feelings when I have feelings too. These counter-narratives provide psychological protection through creating alternative story where they're not the villain, where their behavior is justified, where the confrontation is about the other person's unreasonableness rather than their own dysfunction. Your unbotheredness provides nothing to push against. There's no position to disagree with. There's no argument to counter. There's no narrative to construct in opposition because there's no narrative being presented. There's just your peaceful existence. And peaceful existence cannot be argued with or reframed or defended against. The absence of anything to push against leaves them with nothing but the truth of what your peace communicates, and the truth cannot be defended against because defending against it would require acknowledging it, which would require confronting what it means, which is exactly what their system is trying to prevent, but cannot prevent, because there's no defense mechanism designed for this specific situation. Direct confrontation also inadvertently communicates that they still matter, that you care enough to be hurt, that you're invested enough to try to change things, that the relationship is significant enough that you're willing to have difficult conversations about it. Even expressions of hurt communicate significance. Even anger communicates that they affect you enough to create strong emotion. Even ultimatums communicate that relationship matters enough that you're willing to draw lines. Your unbotheredness communicates something entirely different. Not that they don't matter, but that their ability to determine your emotional state has ended. They might still matter to you in some way. Your peace doesn't necessarily communicate indifference. But whatever they matter, it's not the desperate kind of mattering that gives them power over your emotional landscape. The power dynamic has shifted fundamentally, and the shift happened not through any dramatic action, but through your quiet, genuine, authentic peace with however things unfold. What, their insanity, in the face of your unbotheredness, actually reveals about them and what it means for you. The avoidant psychological crisis in response to your genuine peace reveals specific truths about them, about the relationship, and about the dynamic that existed between you. Understanding what their insanity reveals helps you see the situation with clarity that serves your continued healing and your continued peace. Their insanity reveals that their entire sense of significance was built on your suffering. This is uncomfortable truth, but it's the truth that their reaction exposes. When you were pursuing, when you were hurt, when you were desperately invested in whether they stayed or went, they felt important. They felt significant. They felt like they mattered in ways that made their own existence feel meaningful. Your suffering was the evidence they used to confirm their own significance, and without your suffering, without the evidence that they could affect your emotional state through their behavior, their sense of significance crumbles. This reveals something deeply problematic about how they derived their self-worth. They needed another person's pain to feel like they mattered, needed your pursuit to feel desired, needed your desperation to feel essential. Your unbotheredness removes this source of self-worth, and the removal is creating crisis because they have no alternative source to replace it. Their insanity reveals that the power dynamic in the relationship was never actually about them being powerful, but about you giving them power through your participation in the dynamic they created. They believed they held power because they could withdraw and create anxiety, because they could go cold and create pursuit, because they could withhold and create need. But this power was borrowed. It existed only because you were participating in the dynamic through your anxious response to their behavior. The moment you stopped participating, the moment you stopped responding with the anxiety and pursuit their power depended on, the power evaporated. It was never theirs. It was always yours to give or withhold, and you've withdrawn it, and the withdrawal has revealed that their power was always illusion, sustained by your cooperation. This revelation is what's driving them insane. Not that you've done something powerful, but that you've simply stopped doing something that was sustaining their power. Their insanity reveals that beneath their defended independence and self-sufficiency, they desperately needed you to need them in order to feel worthy of existing in relationship. The self-sufficient narrative, I don't need anyone, I'm complete on my own, was supposed to be their protection against the vulnerability of needing. But the reality revealed by their crisis is that they did need something from you. They needed you to need them. They needed to feel essential to your happiness. They needed the evidence of your investment to confirm their own value. And your unbotheredness has removed this evidence, leaving them without the external confirmation they claimed they didn't need, but actually depended on more than they were willing to admit. The crisis isn't about losing you. It's about losing the mirror that reflected them as significant, and without that mirror, they don't know how to see themselves. Their insanity means you should continue exactly as you are, not because continuing your peace is strategy designed to destabilize them, but because your peace serves you, regardless of its effect on them. The most important thing about your unbotheredness isn't what it does to the avoidant, it's what it does for you. It means you've healed enough to be genuinely okay. It means you've done enough work on yourself that your worth no longer depends on their recognition. It means you've built enough life independent of the relationship that your existence is genuinely fulfilling without them at its center. These are achievements that serve your well-being, your future, your capacity for healthy relationship going forward. The fact that they also happen to create psychological crisis in the avoidant is secondary effect. Real consequence, but not the primary reason your peace matters. Your peace matters because you deserve peace. Full stop. What it does to them is their responsibility to manage. What it does for you is everything. Their insanity ultimately means you've accomplished something that most people in your position never accomplish. You've genuinely freed yourself from the dynamic that was keeping you trapped. Not through dramatic confrontation, not through angry ultimatums, not through manipulation or games or trying to make them jealous or trying to create specific response in them. Through the quiet, difficult, profoundly healing work of choosing yourself consistently enough that the choosing became genuine rather than strategic, real rather than performed, deep enough that it couldn't be shaken by their provocations or their monitoring or their desperate attempts to restore the dynamic they depended on. You were unbothered, genuinely, authentically, and that authenticity is doing what nothing else could do. It's showing the avoidant exactly what their patterns cost them, exactly what the power they believed they held actually was, exactly what happens when the person they assumed would always need them decides that needing them was never actually serving their happiness. You're unbothered, they're insane. And the distance between those two states, your peace and their crisis, is the truest measure of how completely the dynamic has shifted, how thoroughly the power has transferred, and how fundamentally the relationship between you has changed, from one where they held all the cards to one where you hold every single one. Not because you took them, because they were always yours. You just finally picked them up. Not because you took them, because they were always yours. You just finally picked them up. And here is what they're learning through this insanity, through this destabilizing, disorienting, impossible to rationalize experience of watching someone they believed they held power over simply existing in peace without them. They're learning that the entire framework through which they understood relationships was built on flawed foundation. They believed relationships worked in a specific way. One person pursues, the other person controls through withdrawal, and the pursuer's desperate investment gives the withdrawer significance and power. This framework made them feel safe because it gave them predictable role, gave them sense of control, gave them position where they were the one being wanted rather than the one wanting. But your unbotheredness has demolished this framework entirely by revealing it was never about power at all. It was about participation. The dynamic only existed because both people were playing their assigned roles. You played the pursuer, they played the withdrawer. And as long as both people maintained their roles, the dynamic persisted and the avoidant maintained their illusion of control. The moment you stopped playing your role, the moment you simply stepped off the stage entirely, the entire production collapsed because it required your performance to function. They're standing in wreckage of framework that organized their understanding of every relationship they've ever had, and they don't know what replaces it, don't know how to operate without the role they've been playing their entire life, don't know who they are if they're not the person who creates anxiety through withdrawal and maintains significance through withholding. This is why their insanity feels so complete. It's not just about you. It's about everything they thought they understood, about how love works, how relationships function, how they maintain their worth in connection with another person. You've dismantled not just the specific dynamic between you and them, but the entire operating system they've used to navigate every intimate connection they've ever had. And the dismantling happened without your intending it, without your trying to create it, without any strategy or plan designed to produce this specific effect. It happened simply because you healed, simply because you chose yourself, simply because you reached genuine peace that couldn't be manufactured or performed or strategically deployed. It was the natural result of doing the internal work required to stop organizing your emotional life around someone else's choices. The avoidant is experiencing this as attack on their psychological infrastructure, but it isn't attack at all. It's simply what happens when someone stops cooperating with a dynamic that required their cooperation to survive. You didn't attack them. You simply stopped feeding the system that was keeping them powerful and keeping you trapped. And the system, deprived of the energy it needed, collapsed under its own weight. What makes this particularly significant? What makes your unbotheredness not just personally destabilizing for them, but potentially life-changing if they allow it to be, is that it's creating the exact conditions required for genuine growth. The avoidant cannot grow while their framework remains intact. They cannot develop new capacity for intimacy while their old system of withdrawal and pursuit continues functioning. They cannot become different person while familiar dynamic continues providing them with significance and power they haven't earned through actual emotional availability. Your unbotheredness has removed the system that was preventing their growth by removing the dynamic they depended on. Whether they use this removal as catalyst for genuine transformation, or whether they simply find new person to create the old dynamic with, is entirely their choice. But the opportunity exists now in ways it never existed before, because for first time in their life, the familiar system has failed them completely, and failure of familiar system is the only condition under which genuinely unfamiliar response becomes possible. You should know this. Your peace isn't just serving you, it's serving the only possibility they have of becoming someone capable of healthy love. Not because your peace is designed to teach them, not because your unbotheredness is lesson you're deliberately delivering, but because the removal of the dynamic they depended on is the only circumstance under which they might finally be forced to look at themselves honestly, to ask why they need another person's suffering to feel significant, why withdrawal became their only strategy for maintaining connection, why they built entire sense of worth on foundation that collapses the moment the other person stops participating. These questions, the questions that could genuinely change who they are only possible now. Only possible because you stopped making them unnecessary through your pursuit. Only possible because you stopped confirming their significance through your distress. Only possible because you became genuinely okay, and their insanity in response to your okayness has cracked open the only door through which real change could ever walk. You're unbothered. They're finally forced to face why that bothers them so much. And the facing, whether it leads to growth or whether it simply leads to deeper defense, is the most honest moment they've had since the relationship began. Because for the first time, they cannot hide behind the dynamic. For the first time, there is no dynamic to hide behind. There is only them and the truth of who they are, and the question of whether who they are is someone they're willing to change. You gave them that question simply by being okay, simply by choosing yourself, simply by refusing to remain the person whose suffering confirmed their worth. The question is theirs now. The answer is theirs now. And you already have yours. You're unbothered. And that unbotheredness is the most powerful, most healing, most genuinely free state you've ever occupied. Hold it. It's yours. It was always yours. They just needed you to stop giving it away before you could fully claim it.